Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the U.S. Constitution, drafted way back in 1787. But we're going to look at it a bit differently, as a master architectural blueprint. Honestly, you can think of it as the oldest written operating system still running today, and when you really stop to think about that, it's absolutely wild. I mean, the framers engineered this brilliant federal presidential system for a mostly agrarian society of just about 4 million people. Yet somehow that exact same framework is still running a modern global superpower today. So let's walk through exactly how they designed this incredibly enduring architecture.
Okay, so here's our agenda for this top-down architectural tour. We'll start with the master blueprint, step inside Article 2, outline the powers of the president, introduce the supporting cast, and finally wrap up with checks and balances. Starting with Section 1, the master blueprint. We're kicking off our tour with a wide shot of the entire building. We're going to push open those heavy doors and look at the history and structural elements laid down by James Madison, the guy widely known as the father of the Constitution.
This timeline perfectly captures the rapid, almost frantic historical evolution that gave us the system we know today. We kick things off in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence and move quickly to the Articles of Confederation in 1781. But here's the crucial context you have to remember. Those articles were actively failing. The newly independent country was literally on the brink of financial and political collapse. So when they called the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, it wasn't just some casual meeting to tweak a few rules. No, this was a high-stakes rescue mission. That intense pressure cooker environment led to a super swift ratification in 1788, bringing the new government into force by 1789. It was just a massively tight window of existential historical change.
Now, before we look at the specific branches they built during that convention, we've got to understand the absolute core design principle here, the separation of powers. The framers engineered a structural system that divided the government into distinct branches. Why? To prevent any single entity from gaining absolute control. It's brilliant. And this works right alongside federalism, which is just the splitting of power between the national government and the individual states, and a bicameral legislature. Bicameral just means Congress is split into two separate houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, which was intentionally designed to slow down the lawmaking process. Together with the rule of law and an independent judiciary, these principles are exactly what keep the entire structure so remarkably stable.
So, how is it all organized? Well, the document is laid out almost mathematically into a preamble, 7 articles, and 27 amendments. The first 3 articles construct the 3 distinct branches of government. You've got Article 1 for Congress, Article 2 for the Executive, and Article 3 for the Judiciary. We also see Article 5, which outlines the amendment procedure, and Article 6 establishing the Supremacy Clause. This clause is a huge takeaway because it establishes that federal law ultimately trumps state law if there's ever a conflict. The whole thing is just a highly organized modular blueprint.
Moving on to Section 2, inside Article 2. Let's zoom into arguably the most famous room in our blueprint, Article 2, which establishes the executive branch and the presidency.
The American president wears an astonishing number of hats all at the same time. They are the head of state, the head of government, the commander-in-chief, and the chief executive. The framers concentrated an immense, almost mind-boggling amount of responsibility right into this single office. What makes this so fascinating is that in a lot of other countries, these roles are separated to reduce the stress on one person. For example, a king or queen might serve as the symbolic head of state, while a prime minister handles the day-to-day as head of government. But the U.S., they combine them, placing the president at the absolute high-pressure center of the entire executive system.
But here's the catch. The architects of this system had this deep, lingering fear of mob rule, and especially the rise of a new monarchy. To stop this incredibly powerful executive from just becoming a king, they designed a strict limitation. The president, who is chosen by the Electoral College rather than a direct national popular vote to buffer against those fears of pure majority rule, is bound by a strict 4-year term limit. You can think of this as a built-in reset button for the operating system. No matter how powerful the executive becomes, that power has an expiration date and always returns to the electoral process.
Now, an absolutely crucial point is that this constraint was tightened up even further later on by the 22nd Amendment, which permanently limited any president to a maximum of 2 elected terms. The history behind this is actually super interesting. For over 150 years, presidents strictly followed an unwritten 2-term tradition set by George Washington himself. But then along came Franklin D. Roosevelt, who successfully ran and won
4 consecutive elections during the massive crises of the Great Depression and World War II. After FDR passed, Congress essentially decided, you know what, we can't rely on unwritten traditions anymore. So they hard-coded the rule right into the operating system, ensuring no single individual can ever hold the office indefinitely.
All right, Section 3, Powers of the President. Now that we've seen the walls of this room, let's check out the specific tools the president actually gets to wield.
When we break these powers down, we get a really sharp contrast, showing the dual nature of the presidency. On the domestic front, honestly, it's a constant grind. The president has to fight through fierce politics, manage massive federal agencies, appoint officials, and figure out whether to sign or veto bills passed by a usually fractured Congress. It's incredibly tough. But flip over to the foreign and military side, completely different story. There, the president acts as the undisputed commander-in-chief of the armed forces and holds the diplomatic power to literally recognize entire foreign governments. So at home, they're a political negotiator constantly bound by checks, but abroad, they're this primary, powerful military and diplomatic leader.
The president also has some highly specialized tools in their kit. They can negotiate international treaties, and they even exercise a unique form of judicial power by granting pardons and reprieves. The pardon is actually a really rare example of a nearly unchecked presidential power. The president can basically erase federal convictions at will. But contrast that with the diplomatic power to negotiate treaties. That one has a massive built-in structural boundary, requiring a 2/3 Senate approval before it can ever become active. You see, the blueprint very rarely hands out power without attaching a pretty heavy leash.
Moving into Section 4, the supporting cast. A chief architect definitely cannot work alone, so let's meet the critical supporting staff mandated by the system.
This comparison is great because it highlights two very different support structures. First up, the vice president. Historically, this role was actually mocked by early VPs as being relatively powerless, just standby equipment that mostly involved a lot of waiting around. Their specific duties are serving as president of the Senate and casting tie-breaking votes. But despite all the old jokes, they are quite literally one heartbeat away from the most powerful office in the world, being first in the line of succession. On the flip side, we have the highly active cabinet. This is an advisory body made up of the heads of executive departments who are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate.
Let's look a bit closer at that cabinet. It's composed of executive department heads. Think the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State. What's really vital to understand here is the chain of command. Yes, the Senate has to confirm these cabinet secretaries, but these department heads answer directly to the president, not to Congress. This means the president possesses the ultimate hire and fire authority. If a cabinet secretary goes rogue or refuses to execute the executive agenda, the president can simply fire them at will. They are strictly the president's team.
Finally, Section 5, checks and balances. Let's zoom out again and look at the structural emergency brakes, keeping this entire building from just collapsing under its own weight.
This matrix shows the absolute genius of the 1787 design by illustrating how the branches continuously interact with one another. Rather than just listing off these powers, let's imagine a little micro scenario. Let's say Congress writes and passes a controversial new bill. The president absolutely hates it and uses their power to veto the legislation. Well, Congress fights back, gathering enough votes to override that veto, officially making it a law anyway. But then, a citizen challenges the law, and the Supreme Court steps in, exercising judicial review to strike the law down entirely for violating the Constitution. That little story? That is the matrix in action. Every single branch has a specific, powerful mechanism to check the power of the other two.
And that brings us to the ultimate emergency brake. Despite all those vast, sweeping powers granted in Article 2, the blueprint makes absolutely sure that Congress retains the ultimate constitutional authority to remove a president through impeachment. This is an incredibly serious fail-safe built into the architecture, designed to protect the system from profound abuses of executive power. And by design, it requires a massive, bipartisan consensus in the Senate to actually convict and remove a president. That ensures this nuclear option isn't just used to settle everyday political arguments.
So, we arrive at our final thought. Is this 1787 blueprint still the best design for today? As you digest everything we've covered in this explainer, from the Electoral College and the separation of powers to that intricate web of checks and balances, keep this in mind. This is an operating system written in the era of muskets and quill pens, and yet it is now being used to regulate artificial intelligence and manage massive nuclear arsenals. It's the oldest written constitution still in force, but its true test is how it functions for us right now in the modern world. So what do you think? Thank you so much for joining me on this tour of the ultimate American blueprint.